I'd like to begin by first acknowledging the land upon which I gather and live, the Gadigal Wangal people. This land is and forever remains the land of the Gadigal Wangal, and I respect their ancestors past, present and emerging. And I just invite you to also pay your own respects to the people upon which land you live on, wherever you are in this lovely, beautiful country of ours. Hey, Cicely, show us your organs. Welcome, Christy. I'll give him a spin later for you, Christy. Okay, so tonight what I want to talk about is a bit about my practice and urban druidry. We're faced with a reality that many of us don't have the opportunity to live away from the cities, and so we find ourselves not necessarily trapped, but in circumstances that are what they are. And so as druids, it's really important for us to find a balance and find the right relationship in order to live out our lives here and still maintain a healthy connection with the spirits of the land upon which we live, with the people who are the traditional custodians, and also those among us who live here today, and understand what that means for the story of this place, and how we can contribute to the continuity of those stories in a healthy and really positive way. That's essentially what I'd like to talk about today. I guess the start of my practice as more of an urban druid really came about toward the end of my bardic studies. So I'm a member of the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and towards the end of the bardic grade, there was a moment that I came to a greater awareness of just the sacredness of the land upon which I walked, and in these urban landscapes. And up until that point, I used to seek out nature away from the city. Although I'd appreciate the beauty all around me, I wasn't really cultivating those really important foundations around me to support my practice locally. And instead, I sought those out away from my home and saw those as being the most important ones to have. However, it was towards the end of that grade that that awareness dawned on me, that that connection I had was so strong, or here already, in the park across the road from my house where I walk my dog every day, or around the corner where there's a beautiful tree that's just dominating someone's tiny little patch of land out front of their townhouse. Those relationships were already subconsciously leaving their mark and impressing upon me a deep sacredness that's really important to me as a druid. And it was that moment that I realised the most important relationships I already had in place. I just wasn't really aware of just how profound they were, or having that effect on me. So what that made me turn to was that greater appreciation of the urban landscape, and that landscape that I was already in. A lot of them are new. I wouldn't say that they're necessarily old, although there are examples of trees around here that are really old. I couldn't say that they are, ancient. They might have been planted. I don't really know their history as such. However, they're here. They are part of that beautiful resilience and the resistance that nature has in these harsh concrete environments. And that, to me, speaks to a side of my druidry that is deeply profound and deeply moving. And so as an urban druid, I started to appreciate the cycles of the landscape around me, but also not letting go of that broader connection that I'd been working on with the outer wheel of the Sydney Basin. So to sort of bring into balance that need I had still to sort of retreat to the forest, but also to acknowledge and respect those relationships I had here, I started questioning what my Druidry meant in the larger scheme of my relationships with the land and the stories I used to tell myself about that. I guess what I was trying to do was bring back into balance the inspiration that both of those places were having on my relationship with nature, on my relationship with the environment, and also, more importantly, more profoundly, the relationship that I was having with myself, both this talking self, but also that inner spiritual self that was undergoing a number of changes, both subtle and profound. And so with a couple of other druids locally, we started walking the wheel because we were acknowledging our urbanness as druids, and that this was part of our landscape. But we wanted to bring in that urban landscape and anchor it in ourselves and in our own practice, by not suggesting anybody had to do it in a particular way, but by walking the wheel and as we did so, drawing that energy, spiraling it back into our urban environments and into our inner groves. And so for me to for my personal experience of that, what enabled me to do was to draw in that need and draw in that connection by seeking out those places outside of this urban place, planting seeds, and then by doing that, establishing a bond with places all around the Sydney Basin. So the urban druidry that was emerging for me was about seeking out, using the wheel of the year, the 8 main rituals of the year, and each one acknowledging the directions in which we celebrated them in, planting seeds in those places and allowing that connection to that place to like the ebb and flow of a river or the shore of the ocean, to bring that energy in and also to send it back out, and so thereby establishing a relationship with that place in that direction at that time of year. And it was the first one, I think, was perhaps the most profound, and just taking a breath and just sitting with that for a moment, I still will never forget the cadence of the cicada and the deafening roar of what it meant to immerse ourselves at that moment in the heat of summer, the height of midsummer, the sweltering, oppressive, transformative, destructive power of summer, and going out and immersing myself in that, experiencing it firsthand, planting those seeds, finding the inspiration in the seasonal symbols that were all around us at that time, and then walking back out again of that space and bringing it back into this urban landscape and tying it back, anchoring it back into where I am now, into where we are today. Yeah, the Cicada King. I'll never forget him, Beck. Never. And so by doing that, by bringing that point of the north into that personal landscape, I was able to then continue that journey around the wheel, and in each of the locations around the Sydney Basin, was able to send out my intention behind each one of those trips and each one of those treks into the bush, to then bring it back into the urban landscape, because this is where I practice, this is where I live, this is these are the deepest relationships I have. They're here, all around me. And I wanted to incorporate those lessons of the wheel and my experiences in those places as I walk the wheel around the Sydney Basin, but bring them back here, make them meaningful to me here, and explore them metaphysically as well. And so from an urban druid perspective, it was really important to establish those relationships with those 8 directional areas, planting those seeds, but then also going back around the wheel and just encouraging the growth and development of those relationships, because I think too, one of the important things, certainly from an urban perspective as well, is that change is inevitable, and it's really quite upsetting sometimes to see the type of change we see. But at the same time, what happens is there grows a resilience, and I think the greatest lesson that you learn within an urban landscape is the resilience of nature, because even in those cracks of the pavement, you'll see life struggling to emerge and establish itself and remind us that it's always there, it's always part of us, it's never far away. So to be able to walk the wheel and bring and plant those seeds, to find that inspiration and make that contact with that broader landscape, I was able to really then draw it back into the centre. And Julie, I mean actual metaphorical seeds, not literal seeds. It's another conversation about what should be planted and where. But they were metaphorical for the sake of anchoring myself in those points, and being able to draw upon that relationship that I was trying to establish with those various locations. And so a big part of my urban druidry at that point was establishing a very physical, a very literal wheel of sacredness, and it was built upon the intention of understanding the world of nature, and working out ways of communing with it more deeply on a very physical level, so that physical relationship can help inform the spiritual one. And that is probably been one of the greatest lessons I've been developing over the last couple of years, really, in my practice, assisted with some of the other work I do with other magical groups. But that relationship, when we enter the right relationship with our environment and our environments, because there are many that we have to operate through, we're able to build not only rapport but also respect and understanding, and deep connection, whether it's deep witnessing, whether it's deep listening, whether it's advocacy or activism. Once we have or are in the right relationship with those environments and our environments, because as Emma was talking about this morning, we're not separate from them. I think that's one of the greatest lessons ultimately, is that we are becoming more in tune with those places, because we're part of them. We're not separate from them, and we don't exist outside of those ecosystems. We are as much an influencer as we are a recipient of those really delicate and sometimes really complex relationships. But I think through that process of immersion, we're able to really draw that information in and really help inform that urban landscape that we live within, because by having that anchor outside, we're able to really bring that focus back and that intention into ourselves, so that when we walk these urban landscapes where we might fail to see that same profound significance in the landscape around us, we're able to draw upon those relationships with that broader landscape and bring them into this one here, and help cultivate that essential vitality that's sometimes missing from some of our green spaces. Allowing them to become a little bit wild, or working with local groups to try and replant, or to be a warrior for your local park and pick up the rubbish. You know, these are all different ways that those relationships can really influence the type of druids that we are. And even if you don't call yourself a druid, it's the type of person you are when you're in the right relationship with your environment and your landscape. I think that even within this urban framework, by establishing those really strong emotional and spiritual bonds with the landscape on the broader scale, and also bringing it back and centralising it in this urban environment, we're really able to rewild ourselves in ways that otherwise might have been closed off to us, because we didn't have those relationships to influence the type of druid we can be in the urban environment, because it's sometimes hard to make that same connection in the same way. So in a nutshell, that became like a foundation for how I experience druidry. And now, having that really strong connection with the landscape, having a strong connection with these radial points around where I live, I'm really feeling quite empowered to act in good conscience and in the right relationship with those different places, and be a strong advocate for this place that I live within. And also, more importantly, that connection's allowing me to cultivate relationships on the inner plane that up until I'd done some of that work had been really shut off to me. So that's also been quite important. I think to what it's given rise to is the development of a wheel as well, in terms of correspondences and how they work for me, because we've talked a lot about this in Druids Down Under, about how our landscape is quite different, obviously, from the Northern Hemisphere, where a lot of the information we have about our practices comes from. So by establishing this relationship with the greater wheel and helping it develop my own urban practice, what I've been able to do is also develop my own wheel and the correspondences which relate to it. And they're not traditional. They don't really reflect a lot of the traditional ideas, but they're significant to me. And around that wheel, there are 8 significant trees that each correspond with those points in the wheel, and they're all native. Most of them are native, except one. And the way I relate to them and the way I work with them is also quite different, because by having that relationship with the landscape and a tree from that landscape, I'm able to then work on the inner plane as an urban druid and draw upon that relationship with that tree in that direction, and in doing so, help work through what exactly I'm trying to achieve by setting the intention, by going in with an open heart and with the intention of immersion and deep listening, able to really commune with that place on the inner plane, because the work has been done and the work is being done and the work is changing and evolving. And so as an urban druid, I still feel deeply connected with the greater landscape. And by establishing those bonds with the greater landscape, I'm really able to develop and work with a framework that is in harmony as much as it can be as much as it is in intention with this place, because I think living in an urban environment is like living in some ways in this harsher outer environment where there is a lot of contrasts that are quite confronting, and they force us to question whether we should even be having a relationship with them. But in this environment, because of those sharp edges, you're able to stop and think and question, and before you even do the work, you work out the intention, because in this urban landscape, it takes a different type of relationship in order to find the right balance with nature and with our environment. I think more recently, one of the most profound quotes I've heard recently, which I think I'll finish on because I'm probably almost running out of time here, but it's something that I feel quite passionate about. In answer to your question, Julie, yes, the trees do relate to the different places I visited, and they're located in those quarters, in those directions, the 8 directions. But I'm happy to answer more questions if people want to ask them after this. I'll respond directly to the messages. But I just want to leave you with this quote, because I've heard it recently and I just love it. It's from Matsuo Basho, and it's, "Do not seek to follow in the footsteps of the wise. Seek what they sought." And I think as Australian Druids, seeking what was sought rather than attempting to walk in the footsteps of others is probably the greatest advice these teachings can offer me, because we live in a completely different time and place. However, what was sought is still profound, and it's still meaningful, and it's still so informative, and it doesn't mean to say we forget everything, but we allow it to work in harmony or intention with the places that we live in, and that to me is really what urban druidry is all about. It's about not being overwhelmed by that, but finding the right balance in that, which is something I continue to strive to achieve. I've got so much to talk about, really, but I will have to end it there. I've been rabbiting on now for over 20 minutes, and I think it's about time. So if you do have any questions, feel free to respond to this, and I'll answer them, or send me a message. More than happy to chat about what I do or anything I've talked about tonight, or if you want more information about it. Otherwise, if you're around this Saturday in Sydney, I'll be posting something soon about an event that our Seed group, the Song of the Eastern Seas, will be running for the IMOC. So if you want to join us for that too, you're more than welcome. Otherwise, thanks everybody for listening, and have a wonderful night.